So today we are here today, all undergrads and graduate students, all of us are here together. It wasn't my original plan, but we had the person come in this morning, and so thank you for being flexible. And thank you for coming, undergrads. And so I've got, trying to save trees, ha, you know me, I'm not really, but if you would sign in, here's one on this side, one on this side. If you would just put your full name and just put undergrad or grad on there, and that way I can check off who's been here. So for those of you who are watching this at home later when it's on YouTube, I expect you to take notes and submit those to show that you have watched this. And those are your directions. All right, so I wanted to show you tonight what we're going to be doing is taking a look at the assessment analysis project, a very close look, and you'll get the opportunity to take a little closer look at what's required, and I will actually give you an outline for writing the commentary part. So that'll be helpful to you, I hope. The first thing I want you to do is to check out this site. It's a google.com EdTPA resources. And I've sent this to people, and I don't think you look at it. Just suspicion that you haven't looked at it. But it's very, I am constantly adding things to it. So, for example, here is getting started, and there's some excellent videos, YouTube videos, and some of them are pretty funny. And PowerPoints, all kinds of things. Writing support for the EdTPA. So, how to write the planning commentary, how to write the instruction commentary. I'm actually this is what's on here is actually for elementary, but I have those for secondary as well. Then we've got theory and rationale. And so these buttons will take you to different things to help you with that. So anyway, it is a good resource. I've got down here secondary education. There's not a lot that I've found besides just what I've been making that's just for secondary education. Middle grades is even less, but I'm finding it and creating it and putting it on here. PE, here's academic language. Those of you who are still struggling with that, there's the video of when I recorded the academic language workshop I did. Other things as well. So anyway, that's what that is, and the web address is there. So this is what you can use with your notes tonight. Of course, I didn't just print every slide of the PowerPoint. What I did was I did it in an outline format, and hopefully you'll be able to get what you need. So I don't believe you're going to need your devices. You can put those away. Here's I've given this to everybody once, but that's generally not enough. This is a description of the project. All this also on D2L. Where's that from? Had a big old sub. Who has started on their assessment analysis? Okay. All right, when is your assessment analysis due?
November 11th.
So, for the graduates, when's it due?
November 11th.
And for the undergraduates, when is it due?
16.
18.
Yeah.
I think that's right. One of you all is after the other. And so, this is not a thing that is something you could put off to the last minute. So, you know a lot about this. We're going to talk about it again, even though I know you know. Feel free to ask questions. So, these are the things you need to do. You need to choose an assessment and write your evaluation criteria. What do you think I mean by evaluation criteria?
Rubric.
A rubric is an example. What else?
Acceptable answers.
Acceptable answers. A key.
A checklist.
Checklist.
You're just overachieving on yourself.
We talked about it last night.
She called me. We had a tutoring session on the phone.
Oh, okay.
What else?
Anything in general you could use to grade?
Yeah, so, but we're not looking to grade.
So,
We're looking to evaluate.
yes, evaluate.
That's correct. We want to take the word grade out of our vocabulary. All right, just don't use it because it has nothing to do with this analysis. So we're not interested in how well the students did by grade. We're looking at how well, at evaluating their performance. So your evaluation criteria could be, for example, on this, for this, my evaluation criteria will be, did they turn it in on time? Did they submit all documents in the form that I specified? And the reason that's picky is because that's what they require for the EdTPA. You don't do it the way they ask you to, you get a condition code and it's a 0. So it's a big deal. Because it's going into a platform, everybody's has to be the same. That's why. It's not just some sort of random gotcha thing. So, so getting you used to following very correct directions, following directions. So that, getting it all completed. Then I will use the rubrics from your task 3, rubrics 11, 12, 13, and 15, not 14. And for you, that would be 11, 12, and 11, 12, 10, 11, 12, 13. 10, 11, 12, 13. So on those four out of the 5 rubrics, not the academic language one, I'll be using that to assess your work. So you will need to be aware of what you're writing, where you're writing, and whether or not it's going to match the rubric. You're going to give an assessment. Does it matter what kind of assessment you give?
Multiple choice.
Why don't we want to give multiple choice?
Because it's hard to give feedback. You can't give feedback on a multiple choice answer because it's either right or wrong.
That's right. With certain types of tests, we don't get an idea of their thinking. So what we want to do is to get an idea about their thinking. What's going wrong? We want to be able to analyze. Multiple choice is a great way to analyze groups, but not individuals. You see how that can be? So if I give you a multiple choice test, I can easily see how many people have reached a certain level of mastery very quickly, and I can analyze for the group, but I can't analyze for specific individuals. So not multiple choice. What else do we want to avoid?
Fill in the blank, like one-word answers.
One-word answers, right? What else?
Match, false.
Matching, true, false. Okay, those things are out. What goes in? What can we use?
Like short answer, essays,
Creating something.
Everybody's got to have the same assessment. So they can all create the same thing. But you would have to have a rubric, and they'd have to have guidelines for their creation. What else?
It'd be like a speech.
A presentation of some sort, yeah. What are some things you could use rubrics with? Essays, presentations, performances, projects.
experiments, like projects, I guess.
Yeah, group work even, but that's not going to work for this. These also have to be individual assessments, so it's going to be 3 individuals when you get your 3 focus students. Performances, musical performance. So what you're looking for something is for them to show some depth about their learning. You're going to give the assessment. Does the assessment have to be something you created? No. Does it have to be something that you taught? No. But preferably, you were there when it was taught, but it's not required. Now, next semester, when you're doing the actual EdTPA, and this is, of course, very much like Task 3, again, you don't have to create the assessment, but it does have to be an assessment that you've chosen for the objectives that you're teaching. The most important things about the assessment to remember is that you want to make sure that the assessment that you choose is actually going to give you information on how well the students did on the objectives that you say you're assessing. So if, for instance, you are assessing, you say that your objective, the objective is the learner will add, then there doesn't need to be subtraction on the sheet, okay? So
Can you have more than one objective on the sheet?
you can have more than one objective, but the more objectives that you've got, the more complicated your analysis becomes. I suggest that if you have objectives or more than one objective, that you think carefully about how you're going to work that out. You also want to match up objectives with SSE. So in a perfect world, you would have one objective per SSE. You have to do that. So you may actually need to videotape some of yours because you're going to have to do a paper and then you'll have to do a performance one. So you want to get your little cell phone camera out or something, videotape, okay? You're going to collect the assessment. If people want them back right away, you're going to have to make copies because you're going to have to be able to come up with a class analysis. So you're going to have everybody's work.
So I'm about to go over the Bill of Rights. Could I use that, because we're going to have them, basically regurgitate the Bill of Rights. Can I use that assessment? Would that be,
What are they doing with it?
So what we're doing is basically so the 10 amendments or whatever,
Are they explaining them?
explaining what they are basically, the first one, freedom of the press.
Yeah. Yeah, you could do that, as long as you're real clear about what your criteria is for mastery.
Okay, because I don't want to, as of right now, my mentor teacher doesn't do any kind of test like you all are looking for. So if I just throw a chapter test or something at them in a different format.
Now, a chapter test really is not what I'm looking for.
Well, but like any kind of I'm afraid to throw any kind of test at them that's unfamiliar at this moment without working, because I'm going to be working with them all the time next semester, but now I'll work with them 1 or 2 days a week. So I don't want to throw something crazy at them that they've never dealt with before. I was going to work them into it for the EdTPA.
Okay, that's a good idea. Collect them, make copies, and then once you've gone through everybody's work, start seeing, okay, do I see a pattern here? I mean, I sent you all an email earlier this week. Do you remember what it had on it? Common comments I make on people's D2L about their lesson plans. And of course, I know I haven't finished all of the undergraduate lesson plans. I've gotten through half, though. And I didn't send them to you?
Nope.
I don't know what I'm doing half the time. I meant to. Does that count?
Sure. You get an E for effort. I mean, I can say that because I got my
Yeah.
feedback, so
Yeah.
you get an E for effort.
So I was really desperate to send them to the undergrads because I hadn't given everybody feedback on their first lesson plan yet. So I sent everybody a paper that said common feedback. And so I had identified some common errors. And so if I were going to analyze from that, I could see that we're still, as a group, struggling with knowing what a targeted support is. We're still struggling with knowing how to identify the function and describe the discourse. So there's still some academic language problems going on. So those are some trends that I found, some learning patterns. And so once you've gone through all your papers, look for 3 learning patterns.
But a learning pattern could even be something like all of my students use contractions in formal writing.
If that's one of your objectives. So your learning patterns need to be related in some way to your objectives. They can't be something that's just, everybody knows how to pick up a pencil.
So my objective is, my tentative objective is the students will create an informative essay. And that includes all the formal conventions, so they're breaking those.
I think that's too inclusive.
Okay.
They're getting down to contractions.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. Yes?
Where you want it to be aligned to the objectives, one of mine was in over 70% of my class, handwriting caused them to misinterpret the problem. Is that an acceptable
That
pattern?
actually is.
Okay.
Because you can find that as what did they all do that messed them up and be able to perform on this objective.
Yeah.
That is yes. There you go. That's the kind of thing we're looking for. What did they do well? What did they do very poorly? What are some misconceptions? These are some things you can think about. Once you find these 3 patterns, so you've got pattern A, pattern B, pattern C, find a work sample that shows an example of pattern A. Find another work sample that is an example of pattern B, and find a third that's pattern C. That way you'll have a work sample that is an example of your pattern. Because what you want to do in this assignment and in task 3 is to have 2 types of evidence. You're going to be making some claims. I'm making a claim that my students keep messing up this type of problem because of their handwriting. Okay? So, first of all, she's going to have quantitative evidence in the form of a graph showing that all missed certain problems, or a large majority of them missed certain problems. That's her quantitative evidence. And she's going to have qualitative evidence in the form of a work sample. So quantitative and qualitative. You're going to give detailed feedback on each of the work samples.
I was just wondering real quick, can our patterns, is that like, they get it 100%, they kind of do, or not at all?
Well, so you want to have something to write about. So just saying that they all understand it would not be enough.
Right.
You need to talk about why you think that is and develop that a whole lot more. Yeah. So it is an analysis. It's not you have to think about what that means. You're doing something at the highest level of Bloom's. You're going to give detailed feedback on the student's work. What did they do well in relation to the objective? What do they need to work on still in relation to the objective? You need to suggest a strategy or refer to prior learning, like you can write on their paper. Do you remember last week when we blah, 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 blah? That might help you next time you do this. Or remember in first grade when you learned to read? You might try using that skill. Just kidding, don't say that. You all, where's your sense of humor tonight? Okay, so these undergraduates have not been around Miss Rock for a while, and you've forgotten that I'm silly. Okay, feedback must be related to the objective evaluation criteria. Now, because this paper on the back is something that each of you could do, for example, making something like this or writing this on the back of people's papers has got all of the stuff you need to do well on this task of feedback. For example, you would list your objective or objectives, any evaluation criteria that you could make note of real quick there. You can put student A, student B, student C. Then you would write the things that they did very well as related to the objectives. Things that you still need to work on. And suggested strategies for improvement. So you could handwrite that on the back of people's papers, or you could so for those of you who are at home, I am talking about this right here. It's objective, evaluation criteria, student A, B, and C. You would list the things the student did well, the things the students need to continue to work on, and then their strategies for improvement. So really, it's pretty simple. It's just a matter of doing it. So I'm going to have, I think we'll double check to make sure that that's on D2L with the assessment analysis stuff. You want to blank out the students' names on the work samples. Either take a Sharpie or just a piece of paper and lay it, or a Post-it note and lay it on top of the student's name. You want to scan the copies of the students' work samples, the 3 that you've chosen. And each student has its own PDF file. Student A, student B, student C, 3 separate PDF files, and make sure that I can read them. Now, in the past, I've had people say, well, I want to take a picture. You can't do that because with the EdTPA, you have to you can't use any pings, or it doesn't support that kind of photograph. So you need to actually put in, and you know, it's got to be a PDF. There are scanners down in Tammy Baker's. It's in 209. There's lots of scanners down there, and you can go down there to scan your stuff. But they do need to be scanned. And you can scan things on your phone if you have the right app. I don't know how to do it, but I've seen people do it. And I'm sure I could learn to do it. I just don't have a need to. It can't be that hard. So 3 separate files. This is important. If your feedback is on a separate sheet, then you're going to need feedback A, feedback B, feedback C, again, 3 separate files. Scanned copies of your feedback. You can't write out your feedback typewritten unless you're transcribing an audio tape that you're going to submit. You've got to have the actual handwritten feedback. Now, sometimes people give their feedback on computer programs that your students have. I don't know what they're in. Sometimes that they're in these places where they're taking a test and you're putting their feedback actually onto the computer. Then it's going to have to be screenshots. Okay? So there's just some things that you have to, just to conserve the authenticity of these. These are artifacts. Any questions? Got that? Yes.
If we have like a performance,
Yes.
something like that.
So you and Katie will probably be submitting video files. And try to, we don't have to work on compressing those at this time. They just got to be uploaded onto some sort of private platform that I can see them. Okay.
Can I combine, if I combine the cognitive, like it's like a motor, do 2 in 1, and then, or the affective or something, can I combine 2, or do I can do 3 separate ones?
You can combine. Yes.
Can we type it or anything like that?
Where are you going to type it? Onto their work sample?
A separate sheet, I guess.
Now, it needs to be written on their, yeah, you just can't do that. It's not going to look authentic to a score next semester. So we're really practicing in order to do well on this task. You'll learn a lot from doing this because right now you're finding the problems that you would have waited to find next semester when you're dealing with everything else. So it's a knack in here. I don't like it. Okay. These are your files. And I think I've got the files listed for you on the back of that first sheet that I gave you, or that single sheet on the back. So these file names are exactly right. I want you to name the files the way it's shown on this piece of paper. The assessment commentary is when, so on the back of this feedback sheet, this is a copy of the template that you're answering the questions. So you're going to pull this template up off of D2L, open it, and type within it. I don't have brackets like the EdTPA does, but if it says number 1, A, B, and C, you're not supposed to just choose one and answer it. You're supposed to answer 1A, 1B, and 1C. This is not multiple choice, okay? So open it up. Try to use a different, I think all this is bolded, so that you need to take it off of bold when you answer. That'll be your commentary. That'll be one file. Your actual assessment. I need a file that shows me your actual assessment. Now next semester, what you'll do is that assessment will have to be somehow added to the end of your assessment commentary. So it goes on after, it's like an attachment to that. But that's what you'll do next semester. So you'll have to scan everything into one document. Or copy and paste the Word as a Word document. And so your evaluation criteria. So whatever evaluation your criteria you're using, it could be nothing more than just a Word document that just describes the evaluation criteria. Your assessment, if you're having them write an essay, then your assessment is just a description of the essay assignment. The assignment, what did you tell them to do? You know, so it doesn't actually have to be a piece of paper test when it says assessment. It's just your description of what you did to assess them, and in as much detail as you can get it. Then you want to have 3 files, one for each student, and it says student 1, 2, 3, and I'm not picky if you put 1, 2, 3 or A, B, C. And then your feedback. Now, if your feedback is on the back, on the student work sample, then you don't need separate feedback files. But, let me say this. If your feedback is on your student work sample, and I can't tell the difference between what you wrote and what the students wrote, then as far as I'm concerned, there's no feedback. How can I score feedback unless I know what it is? So if you're writing on the front of their paper where their handwriting is, you need to circle it, write it way over to the side. I need to be able to read it, or write it on the back, or use a separate sheet. Because if I can't tell, if your scorer next semester can't tell what the feedback is, then we assume there's no feedback. That's how it works. So there is a minimum of 6 files that you're going to put on D2L in your D2L Dropbox. Your name is to not be on any of the files. No name on any files. You don't have to put name, you don't have to put rock, you don't have to put 4426 or 5438 or anything. Everybody's file is going to be named assessment. And I'm going to know whose it is because it's going to come out of your Dropbox. Okay? You've got your own little Dropbox. That's where all your work will be. So there's no need to put your name on the file name. I don't know who's telling you all to do that. Put your name.
Every other professor
reading
we've ever
center.
had.
All the education lessons this summer told me to do that.
I've often wondered if it does come out in a separate
No,
Dropbox.
everybody's got their own Dropbox. I guess they're printing them all. And come on up here, Adam, and get your stuff. I guess they're printing them all and then just doing paper copies. Only thing I can figure. I try not to print anybody's work unless I just have to. All right, bunch of files. All right, make sure it's a one assessment that allows students to display a range of understanding on your subject-specific emphasis. You want to have focused students and make sure that the work samples you choose represent a range of performance. You don't want, I'm not interested in 3 students that did fantastic.
So, I'm not saying this would happen, it's just hypothetical. What if you give an assessment, or your mentor gives an assessment, and all the students really actually do pretty well on it, and there's not a huge gaping range of performance?
Then you're not going to have much to analyze.
Okay.
Then I would choose another assessment. Yeah. And that happens.
Right.
That's why you need to choose carefully. So it's not our objective right now for you to show what a fantastic teacher you are. It's because no one thinks that you are going to be fantastic because you're brand new and you may be talented and all of that, but you're new, right? Even talented artists have to start somewhere and they get better. So no one expects that. What we expect is to see how you're able to connect things, make connections, and to analyze, to think things through. So you want to have things to think about. So if everybody's doing great, well, that's fantastic, but it doesn't give you anything to analyze. You want to look for trends. You want to explain any kind of modifications that you made. So this comes up over and over again. When I talk about modifications, am I only talking about special ed? And you can tell from the way I asked that question that the answer is no. If I've got 50 students, I've got 50 different students. And you need to be teaching to 50 different students. And some are not, I've got students in here right now who haven't listened to a word I've said since they walked in the room. I've got other people who are writing down every word. So we've got every range of styles. And it's your job as a public educator, K-12, to try to meet those as best you can. And of course it's impossible to do it perfectly, but you have to be making an effort. So you're looking for people who struggle, or people who are so way above everybody else that they need special attention. So it's not just people with IEPs and 504s. Actually, those are the least of your worries. It's everybody else. So think about what you're doing to accommodate any kind of specific learning need. A focus on important trends, and you want to have those examples in your work samples, and then you want to have good evidence for each focus student. What to avoid? Lengthy list of standards or objectives. Because the more you've got, the more you have to analyze. And you have to show alignment. You have to explain your alignment. If the standard is the student will draw dots and your objective is the student will draw dots, you still have to explain how they're aligned. Okay? I'm not kidding. No one assumes you know anything. It's up to you to prove that you know why this standard and this objective match. Okay? And of course, you're not going to have it like that. But that's an example. So don't assume. You have to explain. So you don't want a lengthy list of standards and objectives. Not one of those things where it's the more the merrier. You want to make sure that they are very well aligned to the assessment. If you have misalignment between your criteria, your objectives, and analysis, that's an automatic 1. So, for example, if you're having students write an essay and the objective is to describe Ben Franklin's inventions, then it isn't fair to grade them on grammar, usage, and spelling, because that wasn't your objective. You want to not have one that only allows students to display a narrow range of field of knowledge and skills, and you want to avoid an assessment that's completed by a group. So, when you analyze, you need to give evidence. You need to say, what I think is this. So you make a claim. All of my students understood that's your claim. Then you're going to support it with 2 pieces of evidence. One is going to be from the graph that you made. As you can see on graph 1A, you're going to sound so important. And then you're going to support it with an actual quote or something from your work sample. Student A wrote, and that's an example of this claim that you made. Okay?
This is a completely distracted question, but I just now noticed it. It's driving me crazy. Is that a magnetic eraser?
I suppose it is.
That is the weirdest thing. I just saw an eraser just chilling out on the board, and I've never seen a magnetic one before.
I want to wake up tomorrow morning and be Mark Vickers. I want to feel that good all the time.
I'm just curious. Like I was reading what you wrote, and I'm like, why is there an eraser just?
He's just too happy. You're just too happy. Quit that.
I like this all day, every day. I'm sorry.
Good for you. God bless you. All right, so you want to make sure you avoid a big, long length. You want to have a complete analysis. You want to make sure that you are actually citing the evidence from the work samples. You want to make sure that your feedback is appropriate to the objectives, not just something about, well, you know, he forgot to use the correct punctuation or something like that. It needs to be, and you can't, what's the difference between feedback and praise? Give me an example of praise.
Praise is like
Good job, Billy.
Good job, Billy.
Yeah.
So what would be feedback for Billy?
You did X very well.
But these are some things you could did better. Yeah.
No, and then
How did you do? Okay, and yeah, and you can be even more specific than that. What was very well about it, right?
you did X very well by doing this, this, and this.
Yeah. Now, this is where I had to give you my little talk about best practices, because everybody's sitting here thinking, no one grades papers like this. So I spent 32 years in K-12 schools. I know no one grades papers like this. With the Ed TPA, what you are demonstrating is that you have a knowledge of best practice. This is not necessarily a reflection of what's going on every day, so much as that you know how it should be done. Under the best of circumstances, in the best situation, what should you do in order to get the best outcome? And that's it. That's what it would look like. No content inaccuracies. I wouldn't think we'd have that, but you'd be surprised. You want to make sure that you explain really carefully. Now this is the part, there's a question on there that says, how will focus students understand and use feedback? So understanding feedback. If I give you feedback on D2L, you are very likely not to look at anything but the score. If it says 100, you won't necessarily go and read the feedback. If it says 90, you probably won't go read the feedback. You might. If it says 50 or 75, you'll go read the feedback. That's why you get lots of 50s and 75s the first time around. Because that way I know you'll read the feedback. I make you look at the feedback, and then I make you use the feedback because I require you to do what? Rewrite and resubmit. So I'm requiring you to use the feedback. I'm also requiring you to look at it. Now in a public school class, and at the end of this semester, if I will probably not bring in everybody, but I will bring in a lot of you into my office and say, this is what you need to work on next semester for the EdTPA. And that will be me explaining the feedback to you, because when you get your assessment analysis back, the only thing you're going to be interested in is, thank God it's done and what's my score. And I can't make you look at the feedback. I can give you the feedback, but I can't make you look at it. But I can if you're sitting in front of me by yourself in the office. And so that's what I'm going to be doing with some of you. Because a lot of you frankly won't do great on this. And I don't really expect you to. It's not that I think that it's just that it's the first time you've done it and it's really hard. So but that doesn't mean you'll have a bad grade. After you come in for your feedback session, your grade will go up. All right, so everybody has an opportunity to do better. Okay. So you have to think about how you're going to not only give the feedback to the students, but how you're going to make sure they understand that feedback, and how you're going to make sure that they use it. Now, clearly, you've got 30 students in your classroom. It's not really very feasible to think that you're going to just pull 2 of them out or 3 of them out and sit down and talk to just them. But think about, if you had a scenario where you could, what would you do? And that's the part of this assessment analysis where you're telling about what you would do, you might do, or could do. You're not reporting what you've done. Okay? So just because you say that you're going to pull 3 students out and work with them on this, this, and this, that is not something that we expect that you would actually do, because you're not even in your placement enough for that. Okay? So it's just really in a future tense. You want to make sure that when you get to the end, you start talking about next steps, that your next steps are related to your analysis of student learning. You go back to your analysis. What did you say they did well on? What did you say they needed work on? And you relate what your next steps are to that. Okay. You can use either a formative or a summative assessment, but it cannot be informal, because you can't collect data on an informal assessment. How specific should your evaluation criteria be? Well, think about accuracy of responses. You can think about the quality of their communication if it involves that, depth, originality, creativity, ideas, in their conceptual, thinking about your students' conceptual development, where are they? These are just some things that you can think about. How detailed should the analysis be? So once you've assessed each student's work sample, you want to have a quantitative analysis on how all students performed. So you'll want to have a graph. You'll want to label it with your graph what you want to do is that you want to have your evaluation criteria listed here, or objective 1. And percentage of mastery. So I had 80% of my class had mastery on objective 1. 50% had it on objective 2. So it didn't have to be like this, but my point is you need to have not, what needs to be down here is your evaluation criteria. Your evaluation criteria or objectives or both or something needs to be on your graph.
So say I'm doing the bill right. So do I need to have like they got the First Amendment better than they got the Second Amendment?
Yeah.
Okay.
However you think would be best to show the data, just make sure that you're not showing it, for instance, in terms of grades, but in terms of mastery. How many mastered this objective? How many were able to do this? When you're looking at the whole group.
And then put like, say that graph right there. So you say I have 90 students. I put 0 and then 90 at the top, and then you
could do it that way, or you could do percentage.
Okay.
Percentage of students.
Percentage would probably be better than.
Then your qualitative analysis, you're going to be talking about your focus students on these, when we're talking qualitatively, and then you explain the analysis both ways. You're looking for patterns of learning. What did many and most understand? Common errors. All of this is in your notes. You don't have to give multiple examples. Like for instance, if you find that most of your students did a certain thing, then you can simply state, this percentage of students had this common problem, and then just find one good example. You don't have to have multiple examples. So it's not the more you throw it at, the better. And make sure you address all of your evaluation criteria and your subject-specific emphasis. So you'll choose your focus students by finding your patterns of learning and then finding your work samples that represent those. For you choose your focus students beforehand. Okay? And that way you know to videotape. What types of feedback should you include? Well, we've looked at that pretty well. Make sure you include, don't put % correct. That's not feedback. It can be on there, but it's not going to count as feedback. Don't say good job. You want to make specific comments, and make sure you try to point out areas that they've done well and where they can improve. So think about what opportunities are there in the next lessons for students to apply their learning. So when you're thinking about how they can understand and use feedback, you can be thinking about, in the next lessons that are coming up, is there going to be an opportunity for them to use this feedback that I've given them? Possibly. Or you can imagine that there is, because you are writing in future tense, right? Would revision of the work sample be a powerful learning experience in this situation? Is there additional support that might scaffold the application of the feedback? Do the focus students have different needs that imply different choices, different supports? So are you seeing that all of your struggling readers had this particular problem? So is there a support that you need to give them going forward in using the feedback? Your explanation needs to demonstrate that you've considered how and when the students will be able to apply their feedback. Next steps should detail the instructional plans that you have moving forward for the whole class. Even if that means you're going on to the new unit, because of course you are. That's what everybody has to do. Be sure to reference both student learning needs and strengths in your commentary. What did they learn well? But this is where your SSE comes into. You remember we talked about in the SSE, like if you have 3 SSE, you have SSE 1, SSE 2, and 3. If you've evaluated how they've done based on SSE, if you have an SSE, an objective for each of your SSE, for example, that'd be a good smart thing to do. And you found that 95% of the students did well on the first SSE, and 90% did well on the third SSE, but only 70% did well on the second SSE. For history, this would be interpretation. And that would mean that in my next lesson, I would be needing to hit that skill of interpretation even harder. Because when you look at your SSE, remember those are building blocks of your lessons that are in every history or English or math learning segment, those components. So I can go ahead, I've been on the progressive era, I can go ahead to the next unit just knowing that my students are doing great with facts and concepts, they're doing great with coming up with arguments, but they really are doing poorly with interpreting graphs or interpreting data, sorry. So that's where I need to talk about. That's what I talk about in that part. So, okay, take a deep breath. This is the outline I've been promising you. This tells you what to write and how to write. I would also suggest looking at the rubrics in your handbook. Rubrics what, did I tell you?
11, 12, 13, 15.
Right.
14.
Not 14.
Not
11, 12, 13, 15 for everybody except for Crystal, and she is 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay? You look at those rubrics, and you look at the URL that explains the rubric. URL, understanding rubric level progression. Undergrads, you know what I'm talking about?
I know Earl's got a diamond mix jigsaw.
Dr. Hogan doesn't like to show you all this document as early as I show it because she's afraid it'll freak you out.
Let's just see it now.
So, and I don't care if I freak you out. But this actually is a fantastic document. I call it the URL. Here's the secondary math one. I don't show math stuff enough, so I'll show this one. Secondary math. And so when you look at it, this explains scoring decisions for planning rubric 1. It tells you what each of the key concepts means. It tells you where the information comes from, prompt 1. So when they score rubric 1, they're going to look at prompt 1 and task 1. And it tells you what a level 3 looks like, what below a 3 looks like, what evidence above a 3 looks like. So actually it's a great document. And it's on my D2L. Understanding rubric level progression, which graduate students I call what?
Earl.
Earl.
Why is that supposed to scare us?
Because Earl has to die.
Because it's got so many words. And I think she's, you know, Dr. Hogan's very experienced. And I think she's right that a lot of people get overwhelmed by all the different handbooks and all those
I get lost
things.
on D2L.
Yeah.
It's hard to
Like every time I
remember
decide.
So what she likes to do is to get you really familiar with one thing first before she introduces another. The graduate students, I don't care. I just throw everything at them. Just here it goes, just have at it.
You know,
I figure they gotta be as smart as I am.
It'd be sweet if every sub, like every, I don't know, like history and math had like their own separate D2L page. Because every time I'm looking for any kind of like.
I do have a D2L
You have it
sub.
broke, you have it broke down, but it's like.
I understand.
Like I end up with like a 20-foot long page and I'm scrolling for days.
Well, one thing is that you'll have all this stuff, you'll have to print it all out before next semester. It all has to be in a binder. But we'll worry about that another day.
Yeah.
So this is what you're going to do. You're going to open up your template and it's going to say, identify the specific learning objectives measured by the assessment for this analysis include standards and teacher-produced learning objectives. So this is what you're going to actually put. This is what you're going to do right here in red. Right there in front of you. Do this and you will do well. Why are you not showing more interest? I'm just giving you the key to the castle. I'm giving you the magic numbers to the Powerball. And you're looking at me. You must be tired. What's the matter with you?
No, because if I win the Powerball, I'm not going to be here.
That's for sure. List the standards.
I'm ready to go on vacation.
So, list the standards, list the learning objectives. Also, describe your evaluation criteria, because you don't have to list your evaluation criteria because you're going to be giving that as its separate attachment. But here you describe it. If you've used a rubric, discuss it here. And this tells you I will be checking for alignment between your assessment and your objective. Don't think that just because you've listed them and it's obvious to you that they're aligned, that I'm going to make that connection. Okay? You need to tell me why you think they're aligned. How is their alignment?
So a good way to start would be, in order to evaluate or assess objective one, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. After you've listed your standards and your learning objectives, I would suggest writing something like, objective one aligns with the first standard by, or the first standard is supported by objective one by, something like that, okay? Are you ready for our 1B? 1B, provide graphs, tables, or charts that represent student learning. Now, in the actual EdTPA, it gives you an option of writing the narrative. I'm not giving you an option of a narrative. I want to see graphs because this is a good time for you to practice that. It's not part of the rubric, but the scores like the graphs, because the scores actually give you the quantitative evidence that you need to get a 5. If you don't have the graphs, you won't have quantitative evidence. Okay? So, you want a graphic representation of performance by student, all students, performance by evaluation criteria. Now, if you can put those all in one graph, that's fine, but you might have to have more than one graph. So whether you use a graphic or a narrative, and actually I don't want you to use a narrative, I should take that out. Make sure that it displays and describes how students performed on the evaluation criteria. Be sure that your evaluation criteria aligns with your objectives. Make sure it's for the whole class. Be thinking about what they got right, what they got wrong, common things that you saw. And remember, you want to, it's not a matter of listing students, student A, B, all the way through 30. We're more interested in how they did as a class on the different pieces of your evaluation criteria. How they did as a class on each objective. So what you really want going along that, what's this axis called down here at the bottom? The x-axis. What you want on the x-axis, I'm so ignorant. I know stuff, but don't know stuff. So the x-axis at the bottom, that's what you want to have. You want to have your objectives, your evaluation criteria. That's what you want there. Even if you have to use a key, like you put an A, a B, a C, and then down below you say A means, and you write out the objective. B means, you write out the objective, whatever. But that's what you want to show.
So that's that chart we were talking about a few minutes ago, right?
Yeah. Okay, 1C. This prompt has 3 parts. So one of the things about the EdTPA is that it was written by a bunch of really extremely smart geniuses at Stanford University. And I don't know if you've ever hung out with any Stanford University professors or people, but shish kabali. And they write, but they don't write the way anybody in the whole world ever understands. They write in complex sentences. They've got all this and or and you're like, what on earth does that say? And by the time you finally finish reading that one sentence that's a half a page long, you're so confused you have no idea. So one of the things that I've done with this assessment analysis is I've made it a little bit easier to understand, trying to keep some of the same language, and then with the outlines that I have available for you, also you'll see that it's been broken down. So, use evidence found in the 3 student work samples and the whole class summary to analyze the patterns of learning for the whole class and differences for groups or individual learning relative to your subject-specific emphasis. Okay, I'm not smart enough for that. So I cannot understand that just reading it one time. I'm sure there's people who are. I'm not one of them. So what I had to do is to break it down. What does this prompt tell me to do? Well, it wants me to describe each learning pattern using quantitative evidence and qualitative evidence, and I need to use graphs and work samples. It wants me to answer this question. How do these observations help me see patterns among the whole group, special groups, individuals? And how are these related to the SSE? That's what has to be addressed here. That's what you write about. And this is how I suggest you do it. This is my outline. Are you ready? There it is. Now this particular question, remember, is about your 3 focus students that you think about here, and your whole class, which includes your focus students, that you think about here. So you got these 3, you got the trees, and then you got the forest. Right? So the best approach is to write 1 paragraph per trend. Remember, we're going to find 3 trends. Describe a learning pattern. Give evidence that the learning pattern exists by referring to it in the graph that you made in 1B. According to my graph in 1B, you will see, right? Then you're going to give an example of the learning pattern by quoting or referencing one of your work samples. As you can see by student A's work, he wrote blah instead of blah, okay? Then you're going to discuss it. You're going to discuss whether this pattern is seen across the class or is it just within certain groups. And your evidence is going to come from your graph and from your work samples to back up what you say here. And what SSE is this related to? This learning pattern that you're talking about, which SSE does it relate to? You're going to repeat this 3 times, 1 for each learning pattern. You'll have 3 paragraphs. 2A, feedback. This is just identify whether you submitted feedback written directly on the work sample or in separate. You just want to answer the question. My feedback was written on the back of their papers. My feedback was written on a separate sheet of paper. My feedback is in a video file. Whatever it is, okay? Let's just want to answer the question. 2B, explain how the feedback provided to the 3 focus students addresses their individual strengths and needs relative to the learning objectives measured. So you're going to now focus, you're going to have 3 paragraphs again, but this time it's going to be 1 paragraph per focus student. Devote 1 paragraph for each student. Focus student A, how did your feedback address their strengths in regards to the learning objectives? Quote your feedback. When I said blank, I was helping this student understand the strength of, because student A did so well on blank, I wrote blank. How did your feedback address their needs? Quote your feedback. That's important. If you don't quote yourself on this, you can't get above a 3. Impossible. They will not give it to you. Because student A struggled with blank, I wrote 1. Repeat that for all 3 focus students. Do that. And then 2C, you need to describe your strategy. So to get this is 2B. Still on 2B, you've got to add a strategy. So in a separate paragraph or in the same paragraph where you're discussing each one, talk about the strategies that you used or how you helped them make relations to prior learning. And that's how you get to a 5 on this rubric, by having that. 2C. 2C is rubric 13. Now don't scrimp on this one because I'll warn you, every single bit of stuff that's used to score rubric 13 comes from this one little answer to this one question. So a lot of people don't do well on rubric 13 because they think, oh, well, you know, this is enough. I can tell by looking at it whether or not you've written enough, whether it's going to be a 3, 4, 5, or a 1. This is crucial because all of rubric 13 is scored from just 2C. Devote a paragraph for each focus student, unless you're doing the exact same thing for a couple of them. So this is, you're going to describe how you're going to support each focus student to understand their feedback and use their feedback to improve their learning in relation to the learning objective that you had on the assessment, either in this learning segment or in another one at a later time. So you're going to devote a paragraph. Here's some sentence stems. Focus student A struggled with blank. I will support this student in understanding his feedback by. I will help this student in using this feedback by. If the scores are really interested in how well you can identify how you help students understand and use feedback, I'd be using those words, understand and use, over and over and over again. Forget that rule where you need to use synonyms. Use understand and use over and over and over again, okay? Because it's not, no one cares how well you write in this type of writing. It's a technical type. You want to address strengths and weaknesses and be certain that it addresses the learning objectives. So you want to write a paragraph for each one, for each focus student. How you help them understand it, how you help them use it, the feedback, or how you're going to do it. It can be written in future tense. 3A, for the whole class, based on the evidence about the whole group that you presented in prompt 1, going back to the evidence that you gave in prompt 1, where are you going to go from here? How does it relate to the SSE? Remember this? Where I talked about looking at your SSE and seeing where the strengths and weaknesses are there? Relate your next steps to as many SSE as possible. That's how you get 4s and 5s. Be specific to the SSE. Don't make global statements such as, I will improve classroom management, because classroom management was not one of your objectives. So it needs to be related to your objectives. Then you're going to talk about your focus students. Where are you going from here? Related to the SSE. Be specific. Special groups. Struggling leaders. People who don't come to school. People who sleep in class. These are all special groups. What are your next steps for the whole group? What are your next steps for special groups? What are your next steps for focus students? Now, when it says to support with research, what they're saying is that, according to Marzano, according to Vygotsky, you really can get away with name dropping just so long as the connection that you make is clear and strong. That you really, it's not about how well you've pinpointed what year Vygotsky said a certain thing. It's how well you apply their theory to what you're doing and make that connection really strong. That's what they're looking for. Okay? You don't have to worry about citations. And that's how you get a 5, is by making that really strong.
So does name dropping Marzano help you with this then?
So, what?
Marzano or whatever his name is?
Uh-huh.
Does name dropping you help you at all? Name dropping him help you at all? Like, because like he's like the god of.
I just use him as an example because I know he's one that people talk about a lot. Vygotsky, you know. There's no magic one.
Is this rubric 15?
Yes. Okay. So it's a lot, but it's task 3. It's task 3 minus one thing, and that's the academic language. And the academic language portion in task 3, we don't do, because it requires that you provide evidence of academic language use. But that is something that you need to think about for next semester, and you need to think about while you're making your lesson plans for the planning commentary for task 1. Remember that you're going to have evidence. You're going to have a 5-minute video clip, or the academic language is going to have to appear on the instruction video clips that you have for task 2, or the academic language needs to be on your work sample. But people don't do well on on rubric 14 because they haven't thought ahead and planned how they're going to have that evidence for academic language. Okay?
So we need to have the evidence of the outcome of our academic language, like if it's discourse, we need to show that in the video somehow, or?
Not necessarily their outcome, just them using academic language. So you're going to be describing their academic language use. But you can't just say, this is what my students did. You've got to provide evidence that they did it. So it has to be video footage of them using academic language, or it has to be part of the work sample that you submit on the assessment. It's just something to have in your mind when you plan your lessons. Now, tomorrow I am doing a workshop, a TPA workshop on diversity. And if you're struggling with supports, that would be a good one to come to. I will warn you that task 2 is often the one that most people are doing very poorly on. As a university, we're not doing well on task 2. And the reason that a lot of people aren't doing well on task 2 is that we spend all semester on task 1. And then you go in, you film real quick, and it's done. And you really can't fix it. But there are a lot of things that you need to be thinking about before you film. So I'm going to have another workshop in November, on November the 16th, from 1 o'clock to 2:30. And I really think you should try to come. And there will be a sign-up thing, and I only accept the number of people that will fit in this room. But that's when we're going to be looking at task 2. And we'll take a very close look at task 2, because task 2 is what has to be on your video. And a lot of people think it has to do with how well they give direct instruction. And the truth of the matter is, if you do direct instruction, you're going to bomb task 2. As in, I know Dr. Hogan's told you all that 500 times. But you need to look at task 2 very carefully and be aware. So you may not need it. Dr. Hogan may be getting that covered in your classes well enough. But we are going to be looking at that very, very carefully. And I have some things to give you that should help you plan for task 2. And when should you be planning for task 2? Now. You need to know. If I had 5 golden needles and they were in a haystack, I would go through that haystack. Okay, if I were $5,000 in a haystack. Okay, let's just go back to the needles. So we know how hard a needle would be in finding a haystack, right? But there were 5 in there, and I had to go through the whole haystack. It'd be hard to find those 5 needles. But if I had 5 needles in my hand, and I snuck over to the haystack and stuck them in there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ran back, and then said, oh, I can find those 5 needles right away. Look at this. 1, 2, because you know exactly where you put them. Hello, if I was going to be videotaping and I knew that they were going to be looking for A, B, C, D, and E, I am not an idiot. I'm going to plan A, B, C, D, and E, and I'm going to have it right there in a 10-minute segment. And I'm going to know where it is. And yet, every single year, we have people with their headphones on, and their screen, and they're going through their video over and over and over again. And they're saying, oh, but Miss Rock, I've got 2 minutes here, and 45 minutes later, I've got 5 minutes, and they won't let me put those together. I'm thinking, well, you didn't listen to me about planning. So you need to make sure you are thinking in your lesson plans right now where that needs to come from. That's how important it is. It has to do with engaging your students. So on your lesson plan, when you're leaving that part there, that student does section, some of you are even writing what teacher does and student does. That student does, and the support, those last 2 columns that a lot of you are leaving blank or just putting something down hoping that nobody's really going to read it, that's where your task 2 comes from. And that's why our task 2 scores aren't good, because people aren't emphasizing that enough. You have to support the learners in a variety of ways, not just the same thing over and over again. So you need to, if you don't get to come tomorrow, I will have the link for you to, and that's fine. I have the YouTube link, and you can listen to the diversity thing. A lot of it is stuff we've already looked at in your classes. So, but if it's something you think you're struggling with, let me know you're coming though, because I have to prepare materials if you haven't already done so. There's a few of you who signed up. Any questions?
On the lesson plan, does there need to be, for the instructional, does there need to be a support for everything they do, every single?
Well, within reason. So if you have the students are going to listen, first of all, remember, listening is not active engagement. Listening is passive engagement. And yes, sometimes they have to listen. But listening is not going to count as active engagement on your video for next semester. And it's not the best way they learn anyway. So if they're listening, how could you get them more actively engaged in the listening?
Guided notes.
Guided notes! That's right. Or outlines that you give them, or graphic organizers. But just having them take notes is not that's going to have support. None of your students are good enough at taking notes. That's a rare student that can take notes well enough in high school. And I don't agree with saying, well, how are they ever going to learn to take notes? It's like saying throw everybody in the pool and walk away and let them learn to swim. You know, you have to teach them how to do this. All right? What else? We got a few minutes, so we got plenty of time for questions. I know you're anxious to leave, but let's get the questions out of the way first. Yes?
On our feedback, like on the student work samples, I know that the majority of the feedback should be directly related to objectives, but if there's something that's really present, like a really bad spelling problem or something,
yes,
we should still.
You can make other comments, you can correct their grammar and punctuation and all those things that you feel you need to do, but it is not part of this analysis.
It doesn't affect the grade, right? That's all.
It should not affect their grade, and it should not affect because that wouldn't be fair unless you're actually, that was the objective, right? So we want to look on how they do, you're evaluating how well they have done on this objective. Yes?
Is there like a minimum length that you would suggest for the assessment?
Well,
Like how do you know if your assessment is long enough?
so that is a problem. That's one of the things you're going to find out, and I can't really give a good answer for that because it sort of depends on your students. So I could give you all, I could say to you all, write me a page, and it'd probably be too much information. But your high school students might not even be able to write a page. They might be able to just do 2 or 3 sentences, but that might not be enough, so you might be able to have to ask several questions.
What if they're not necessarily used to doing assessments that aren't multiple choice?
That's that.
With outside of like maybe an exit ticket where they're asked 2 to 3 questions about that day's lesson. Any other assessment they get is multiple choice.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of with Mark. I feel like if I threw at them,
Well, let me put it to you this way. You are not going to do a multiple choice assessment next
Right.
semester. Because if you do, it's going to be a terrible situation for you. I think it would be better for you to go ahead and get experience with giving them something they're not used to seeing. But just keep this in mind. You're not their only teacher. And just because your mentor has never given them multiple choice, has never given them a short answer, doesn't mean they haven't seen one in another class. Okay? You just need to explain to your mentor that for this assignment, you need to give them something that you get more information from.
Yeah. Well, my mentor, I've already talked to my mentor about it, and he was like, next semester, he's like, I'm going to give you more free reign.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be there every day, and I can do that. And then he said you can work them into whatever you
I think
need.
what you've got planned is fine.
Yeah.
Now, also, I'll say this about the assessment, and it just went out of my head. Oh, shoot, it'll come back in a minute.
My teacher, he does like a quiz or something like maybe every 2 weeks or something. So for this assignment, I may have to like grab something that he's already done.
That's fine.
But what if he already gave out those things to the students, so I can't really look at their stuff? Like, do I?
Their papers?
Yeah.
You can't do it then.
So like.
You've got to have their work samples to analyze it.
So what happens if like the next quiz is coming up, it's like 2 days before the deadline to turn that in?
Then you need to talk to them about how you can get an assessment done from before then. Yeah.
He said, I'm already planning to do my assessment on Tuesday because that's when I'm doing Bill of Rights, and so I'm going to have
And
that.
this is another
already-
part of the whole learning experience that you get this semester by doing this project, is that you understand how much planning goes on in doing this at TPA. And it kind of gets your mind wrapped around the process.
still not came back.
No,
At my placement, they're doing all of their assessments through Google Classroom, so everything's paperless. So whenever I submit my student work samples, it's literally just some text. Is that good? Am I going to be taken at my word?
Do you have-
That's student work.
what do you have for a student work sample? Something that, is it a, what?
No, what I'm hoping to use is like a response to.
Where they've written a response on the
Yeah,
computer?
they've written a response.
Yeah,
in-
that'd be fine.
Okay.
On the actual at TPA, if I do some sort of performance assessment, do I need like video evidence of that?
Yes.
Like within those 2 clips that I have to use?
What I think I would do if I were you, if, for instance, if you were going to have them play a scale, and so you had the trombonist play the scale, and you're sitting right there, and you gave them immediate feedback, then you would have the work sample and the feedback all in the same video. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
Does that have to be in his like 20-minute?
Yeah.
No, that's separate.
Okay.
Yes.
That was-
Yes, I'm sorry, misunderstood your question. That's a separate thing, yeah. Anything else?
So what I'm thinking of doing is, well, we'll go into detail on that. But I taught a lesson several weeks back about a specific component on a unit they're now in. It's a research unit, and what I was teaching about was finding good sources for that paper. They are about to be turning in their research papers. Could I extract part of what they're doing, specifically their work cited page and sources they found, and focus on that for this, considering
Yes.
that's what I taught on?
So often, there's a large assessment that you've given your students, and some of it's multiple choice, and some of it's short answer, and some of it's essay. And if you want to just analyze part of that assessment, that is also okay.
So I just did a lesson like the other day that I might use for this, where I had the students essentially, I gave them like a list of where they could find inferences in the text we read. They had to give me like side lists where they can get the inference, and then give me an inference. They only had to do like 2 out of the 5 that they wanted to do on the list. Can I use that since I'm only using 2 out of the 5? Or I don't use it.
I think so.
Like they have 5 choices, but they only have to do 2 of the 5.
So like different students have picked different ones.
Yeah.
So that.
Like if they didn't want to do the one on 209, like they just couldn't find it, they could go to 210 and try to find that one.
As long as you can collect the same type of data on objectives by doing it.
I mean, it's around, the evidence is around the same ballpark. Like, they should find almost, there's like only 3 chances on each page where there's evidence for it. So
Okay.
it's not like it's totally left.
Okay, that should be fine.
Okay.
Anything else? Yeah.
Did I use an exit ticket from my first observation where they had to identify 3 different types of literary devices and use textual evidence to support their findings? I mean, it's a rather short assessment, but I'm not sure.
It really doesn't matter the length of the assessment. It just matters
What we talked about it.
how good information that you get, that you can write about.
Yeah, because I don't want to use my actual assessment.
Anything else? November 16th, task 2 in here. No, November 16th is when I'm having the Ed TPA workshop on task 2.
Yeah.
And I hope you can come. If you can't, you can't, but they'll have a YouTube video of it. Anybody, if you have, I'm going to hang around if there's any more questions. But I'm going to let people go, and I'll see you later. Yeah, I think so.
I may use my extra.
Yes, it's